We're here today with Charlie Ziese, and we're going to go over pyramids and his research on pyramids and the health benefits and possibly maybe the spirituality part of it. We want to go over the stuff that's actually been hidden from us and kept from us, this knowledge. And I'd like to get it out to everybody in our audience on this. And I come across Charlie on the Mark Atwood show, and he seemed to me to have the key that I've been searching for. It just rang a bell with me, and it was absolutely awesome. And from that point, I looked into pyramids, and then I started looking into frequency healing, and then also magnetic healing, and all of this coincides and is just amazing to me. So we're going to have an amazing conversation today. And I have Michael Capps from Cap Creeps Farm with us today, and I have Mike Tilley. And you guys can introduce yourself if you'd like. And if not, then we'll go to Charlie. Capps, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Michael. We've got a bison farm in East Tennessee, and Tony and I have been talking about doing some kind of healing center on our farms. And that led, I think, both of us down the rabbit hole of discovering pyramids. And then Tony took off with it and has been researching the hell out of it. And I think keeping me and Tilly up to speed on what he finds. So I'm just here to learn and observe, and I'm looking forward to it.
Cool.
I'm more of a I don't want to use the word skeptic, but I've been learning over the last couple of years. I grew up as a Southern Baptist. I grew up in a Southern Baptist family. I found out probably 2 or 3 years ago, everything that I was taught was wrong. It was completely wrong. Yep. Then I wanted to find out how long we've been wrong. It started with genealogy research, find out where I came from. I have Nordic blood, so I started looking into why the Nordic churches were tore down and new churches erected on top. And, you know, we were told that it was to be more inclusive. I don't think it was to be more inclusive. I think there were energy ley lines in those spots, in those ancient spots. So we erect, new churches, new places of worship. And we just, we kind of hijacked an ancient way of healing and used it to control our population. I don't know if you guys know this about me or not, but I do not like to be controlled by anyone or anything. I like to make up my own mind. So I started delving into manifest destiny. Really held a lot of water with me. Cellular memory. When we pass away and we go into the ground, what happens? We're able to retain our knowledge some way. There's things that we inherently know that we pass on into the earth. Mushrooms pop up, grass pops up, cows eat those, we eat the cows, and all of a sudden we're retaining knowledge that we shouldn't have. So and I'm a fabricator. I've been a welder for 26 years, and I'm just a dumb country boy, but all this rings true with me, and the things that are coming to me right now when I meet folks like you guys. It started out with me and Tony. I said, brother, we're going to run into more people. There's more of us. There's more of us out there. We just have to be honest and open about what we believe. I don't know what I believe, but I know what I don't believe. And everything that I've been taught coming up was a lie. And I don't like being lied to, and I don't like being controlled. And I like to be in charge of my own healing. And that's why I'm sitting here with you four guys right now.
That's fantastic. And Mike, we have a very similar background. I wasn't a Southern Baptist, but I grew up in Texas in the Lutheran church. And
congratulations.
Yeah, I have a brother who's a minister. And so, it's we are definitely on divergent paths, in that respect. But everything. Just to give you guys some background, I started on this about 6 years ago. David Wilcock, if you guys are familiar with him, he did a 10-part series on these pyramids about 6 years ago on Wisdom Teachings, which was a show he had on Gaia TV. And I had been a Wall Street investment banker, and so I had kind of got, you know, I had to change careers. So I had quit Wall Street, but was looking for something new to do. And so this, because of the science involved, got me interested. So anyway, that's how I kind of got on this path. But, you know, we'll talk about geometry, we can talk about health and things like that. But when I decided to write the book last summer, and I'm still working on it, it's a work in progress. Each time I do a new section, I realize, well, I got another section I got to write because I've got a new rabbit hole to go down. But anyway, you know, it became clear that, as you were saying, that our history is not just distorted, it's been totally rewritten. And so we'll get into some of that today as kind of a byproduct of learning about geometry and sacred geometry. And you know, one of the easiest ways to prove that is going to be looking at the history of this geometry of this pyramid. And what we're going to find is that it goes all the way back to the Vedic texts and probably before. The elusive Atlantis, you know, whenever and wherever that was, may have been the progenitor of all this information. But it certainly didn't start with Pythagoras. It didn't start with Plato and so forth. This goes way, way back in time. So, you know, it's an interesting, it'll be a great journey. So anyway, looking forward to it. So Tony, you tell me how you want to proceed here.
Well, let's just start. You go ahead with your slideshow there and just start. Let's just dive into it with the geometry and how you come up with it. And I think that's a perfect start.
Sure. And then you guys ask questions as we proceed on here. But I just I have a lot of this information in slide presentation form because, quite honestly, I find that it's easier for people to visualize some of these things than it is to talk about them. So this is a picture of one of the pyramids that was built in Russia. They built about 50 of these throughout Russia and in a couple of countries in Europe. I think there was one built in France as well. But they are made out of non-metallic building materials. I know when I go to expos, or I did in 2019, obviously in 2020, couldn't do that because of the COVID restrictions. But most of the people who would come by our booth would say, how come you don't use copper? They think that copper, for some reason, because they see all these personal meditation pyramids made in you know, base metals like copper, that's a good thing, and it's not. The Russians researched this, a lot of the esoteric material like the Law of One material, I believe the Ramtha material, and certainly our own research indicates that you want to use something that is non-conductive. So you want to stay away from base metals. If you had the money, you could build one out of precious metals and it would work great, but nobody has the money to do that. So what you generally want to do in terms of building materials is use something like PVC or wood or other, non-conductive materials for your construction. And these pyramids, by the way, there's no metal in these at all. They there are no nails, there's no beams or anything made out of metal in these pyramids. And I'm just going to show you quickly that what, these are the pyramid kits, personal pyramid kits that I make and sell at Stargate Pyramids. I'm also the chairman of the Pyramid Science Foundation. You see the logo there to my left. And that's a nonprofit organization that I put together last year. We're starting to try to replicate a lot of the research we're going to be talking about today on health and other benefits. So, and this is a summary of the health information that comes out of the research from Russia. And some of this is just amazing information. So I want to go over that with you today so you can, get an appreciation of how powerful these things are. The first
Charlie
example, they took some, pardon me?
Charlie, let's, can we go back to,
okay.
we're talking about the construction of the pyramid where we said, they don't want metal in there.
Oh, sure.
And let's
Sure.
go over the reason why
Yeah.
they don't want metal in that, unless it's completely the same metal.
Well, this gets back to torsion physics, and torsion fields are what we don't even know what they are because they're not taught in our educational system. This is another area of suppression of information. So, but torsion fields are literally what powers life itself, because it creates distortions in what's called the ether, another concept which has been taken out of our textbooks. So we're getting down another rabbit hole here when we talk about this. But the torsion fields spin in a clockwise spiral, and I can't tell you why, but the torsion physicists in Russia, the most important person who really got torsion physics off the ground was a guy named Nikolai Kozarev. And Kozarev proved through his own experimentation that the existence of metals did something to distort the electromagnetic around the torsion fields.
So
and
it's
that's
just
about as far as I
theory.
can go with it. But
it's not theory, correct? I mean, he has actually done experiments to prove.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
And the Russians did experiments as well. We've tested with a device called the Lekker Antenna. Nobody knows what that is in America because it works, and so it's people don't know about it. But the Lekker Antenna is a frequency specific. You can call it a high-tech dowsing rod. You literally hold it in your hand, and it will designate the existence of particular energy fields. And so, my significant other is a naturopath and a holistic dentist here in Pennsylvania, and she uses that in her practice. So she's very good at it. And when we looked, in fact, the video that we have that has the most viewership was where we compared the energy fields of a copper versus a PVC pyramid built in the same geometry and so forth. So it was a fair, comparison, and there was no comparison. So, it has been studied. And the other thing you got to think about, have you ever seen any metal in the pyramids, the Great Pyramid of Giza, or any of the other pyramids around the world? You don't. It's just something that for some reason people started building these copper pyramids, and they're, you've seen them every day, or when you go out and look on the internet for them, and there's really no basis that I am aware of, in fact, that would prove that that's a good thing to use. And in fact, there's a lot of data that says it's not. So,
Sweet.
So could you make one of these things out of
go ahead, Mike.
pretty much any kind of stone?
Well, if you're making a pyramid with stone, you want to use a stone that, first of all, is durable, but also has a high level of quartz in it, because crystals magnify energy fields, that they're around. So, the first thing that powers the pyramid is its geometry, and we'll get into phi here in a little bit, but PHI is a ratio, not PI, which is the circumference of a circle, but PHI is what's called the scaling ratio, and numerically it's 1.618. But if you have, and it goes on forever, 0.3399, and goes on. But anyway, when you find phi in the geometry of a pyramid, another Russian scientist named Anatoly Akimov, he says that any pyramid that has phi in its geometry will act as what he called a passive torsion generator, which means it'll produce energy. So, the Giza pyramid has phi in it. It has this geometry, and we'll get into the relationships here in a minute. This pyramid has phi in its geometry, and there are other geometric pyramidal forms that have it as well. So you start with the geometry. If it's got phi in it, it seems like it is able to generate the energy. Gets into a lot of harmonics. I don't know if we'll have time to get into all that today too, but anyway, that's the answer. But then after that, the building materials and other energy enhancing techniques can amplify that energy field. So,
All right.
you know, that's the kind of the basics behind all this. So anyway, to go back, some of this is going to be kind of too hard to believe. And that's why I set up the foundation, because these results are amazing. And the first example, you know, thinking of COVID as our, you know, current crisis du jour, if we look at our immune function, as you guys were saying earlier, you know, the key to health is providing your body with the energy, the information, the environment that it needs to heal itself and keep itself in physical shape. So the key to that is having a strong immune function. So what they did, they used a typhoid fever virus, and they did a control study of mice, and the control group lived in their normal cages, and the experimental group was housed under a pyramid. So they injected these mice with typhoid fever virus, and then they checked to see the survival rates. Well, the survival rate of the mice inside the pyramid was 10 times that of the control group. And in this particular case, in the control group, 6% of the mice survived the injection of the typhoid fever virus, but 60% survived it inside the pyramid. I mean, that's just, so think about, you know, we know about all the other cures that have not been allowed to see the light of day in our, you know, with respect to COVID. You know, think if people had a pyramid, we wouldn't have a COVID issue. Not that we necessarily have one to begin with, but that's a separate topic. So, but anyway, so that's the first one. Now we'll talk about, you know, the next one. It says produces dramatic antiviral effects. You know, they studied you know, this in a couple of other contexts and came up with similar results, where they would inject with various types of carcinogens and other types of viral activity, and you know, just tremendous reduction in the you know, problems associated in those experiments. Now, this third one is really important because this tells you how this actually works. Now, I'm older than you guys, but I'm you know, when you get older, there's a gland right here in your chest called your thymus gland. And the thymus gland is a major part of your immune system. And as you get older, the thymus gland shrinks, it kind of becomes fatty, and so it's not as prolific in producing what are called T cells. T cells are the cells that go throughout your body. They maintain the history of infections, so that they have the memory, the institutional memory of your immune system. So as you get older and you don't have that T cell proliferation, your immune system is going to go south, and that's why typically older people you know, might be more prone to these types of new infections. Well, what they found was when they put these mice inside under the pyramid, their thymus seemed to regenerate. It got bigger and it was producing more cells again, and which is pretty amazing. And also, those lymphocytes lived a longer time on average than they did in a control group. So what is the importance of that as well? The longer the T cells remain alive in your body, those are the ones that are going to have that institutional memory. So COVID is a coronavirus. We've been around coronaviruses for 60 years or plus. That's how long we've known about them. So am I concerned about getting COVID? Absolutely not. Just because I know that I'm providing my body with that immune function, and this research, you know, tends to prove that you know, I don't really have anything to worry about. Now, and again, the next one eliminates infant mortality in premature at-risk births. This one is the most phenomenal one of all, I think. They have a test that they would perform at birth on these severely premature births. And when you're very premature birth, your immune system is not built up anywhere near what it should be. And so they would do certain indices that would indicate, and in this sample, those 20 babies that were in this study were expected to die within the next 24 to 48 hours. And, you know, based on history, they should have all died based on the, you know, their prior results in those, with those kinds of tests. Every single one, they gave them water that was stored inside the pyramid. And they would just give them a few drops of the pyramid water, and it improved their immune function to where every single one of them survived. So these are just amazing results. And, you know, we get into reducing airborne environmental poisoning. There's a particular chemical plant in Russia where it was so toxic that they literally had to evacuate all of the surrounding communities in a 25-kilometer radius because of the toxic outflow of this plant. Well, there was one city that was about 40 kilometers away, so it didn't meet the criteria for tearing it down and relocating, but it was right downwind from this plant. And they were experiencing something close to 800 deaths a year from environmental cancers and deaths from the plant. Well, they built one of these midway between the plant and the town, and within 3 years' time, those carcinogenic airborne related deaths dropped from almost 800 to less than 10. So
it sounds like you're describing. It sounds like you're describing an ionizer almost.
Well, I think that could be. You know, you're probably right, Mike, because they are. You know, they did research as well on the field of some of these big pyramids. And you're right, the ionization, that there was enough energy they calculated that is produced by one of these large pyramids it would take all of the electrical power generation capacity in Russia, according to their calculations, to equate to the energy that's generated by one of these large pyramids. And so yeah, I mean, there's just so much, you know, fascinating stuff. Anyway, other areas, they put, it improves rate of healing. They put a pyramid on top of a hospital, and all the doctors said that it dramatically increased the rate of healing for the patients inside the hospital. It lowered violent behavior in mice and humans. And this is an interesting study. They actually took table salt. Table salt is a crystal, and just like water is a crystal. So it will retain and amplify these energy fields. They placed the table salt in a pyramid, stored it for a while, and then they distributed it to about 20 prisons and about 6,000 prisoners in Russia. And all of the violent behavior went away. There were no more fights. The prisoners were calm and peaceful. And, you know, the wardens said that it was like somebody had changed out the prison population, because there just wasn't any more violent behavior anymore.
Wow.
Reduces cancer and tumor growth. And here's another interesting one for athletes. At least in mice, they determined that it improved the athletic endurance of mice by 200%. So you can see the potentials here are just enormous for health and public health. So
now, did it increase the endurance while they were just inside of the pyramid, or were they able to retain the endurance outside of the pyramid?
It was outside. They would live inside, and then I think they had some kind of a course or maze, or I forgot exactly how they measured it, but it wasn't inside the pyramid. The energy impacts, and let me digress, you know, we haven't measured all of that, and that's part of what the foundation wants to do. But when I personally use the pyramid, I know that, you know, when I have the time to kind of do it twice a day, I feel better than just once a day. I sit in it every morning for about half an hour. But if I'm away from the pyramid for a couple of days, it's kind of like you forget, you know, when you're not in pain, you forget you had pain before, you know. And I broke my ankle 10 years ago And I've been compensating on that. So my left ankle, my right knee used to hurt all the time. I have to hold the handrail going downstairs and stuff. And now I don't have to do that. But if I'm away, say out of town for a few days, and so I'm not accessing that energy field, I don't, then the aches and pains come back again, and I'm, feeling a little more cranky and, a little more irritable and so forth. So, there's definitely positive impact. So.
And, have there been any testing done as far as growing medicinal herbs, mushrooms, things like that inside to increase the potency? My friend Michael Capps, he grows a wide variety of medicinal mushrooms, lion's mane, and he can tell you more. He's the mushroom expert, but does it increase any of the potency that anyone has found inside of anything that's been grown or harvested?
Okay. The research in Russia dealt with more traditional pharmaceutical drugs, but they were able to find that when you use particular like antiviral agents and things like that, if you stored them in the pyramid, they became more potent. And in fact, they continued to do, if you're familiar with like homeopathy, they keep diluting. And they found that ultimately it really wasn't the drug that was working. It was just the water itself and the energy that it had picked up from the pyramid. So they haven't done it. Some of the research, interestingly enough, Mike, about hallucinogens is that psychotropic drugs actually they have a diminished effect. Like if you want to smoke marijuana, you're not going to get as high inside the pyramid as you would normally. Now, I haven't really, well, I have no scientific basis. I have some anecdotal evidence of that, but anyway, from others, of course, because, yeah, I mean, so it does have impacts, but we have not done research, and that, agriculture, excuse me, I'll say, I know we've done agricultural research on just traditional greens and plants and so forth. They grow twice as fast, but we have not done research on the impacts of like mushrooms and other, herbs and so forth that might be grown under the pyramid. And that's something we want to do. You bet.
Like
I'll do that.
They have studies.
Okay. Well,
they have studies that just
because I would be fascinated with that as well. You bet.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, sorry, Tony, I'm not trying to interrupt you, but
No, go ahead.
you were talking about this lowers the violent behavior in mice and humans. And what's funny about that is they did a very similar study with the psychedelic mushrooms in a prison, and it did pretty much the same thing. So, obviously I'm not growing psychedelic mushrooms, but they're very interesting. And it would be nice to know, kind of like Tilly was alluding to, like if you grew these things in there, if they had, even if it wasn't a bigger potency, if it just added some kind of benefit to on top of, like one of the mushrooms we grow is reishi, and reishi is really good at improving your immune system.
Okay.
And if you could increase that by, maybe not making the Ganoderma in it more effective, but now that mushroom, as it dries, you're changing all the molecular structure of that water. And see, I'd be more interested in drying the mushroom in a pyramid versus growing it in a pyramid. I mean, I do either one, but it seems to be after you harvest some mushrooms like lion's mane and shiitake, you could set those things out in the sun and they increase their vitamin D by thousands of %.
Sure.
And so I wonder what that would do. And yeah,
so do we. And I mean, this is all the reasons why I set this up, because I want to start doing research, not just on health, but agriculture, environmental remediation. We have, there's a lot of topics. There's some fascinating research that the Russians did as well in environmental research. They found that radioactive materials their radioactivity decreases, and the half-life of the radioactive material, is shortened by having it inside the pyramid. So it has
Oh, wow.
some positive benefits there. What's even more fascinating, they put some of these in Ukraine near the Chernobyl site, and that's where they started to find that some of these towns would have polluted or radioactive water and things like that. They put these pyramids over the wells and so forth, and the radioactivity would go away. They also found that extinct species of plants and things that had not been around for, God, 1,000 years, started reappearing. Streams that were dry and it would start flowing when they built these pyramids. We owned a property outside of where we live now in a rural area, and we had what the Geological Survey called a seasonal stream, which meant we were kind of at the top of a hill or mountain, and they said it was only after rainwater or after rain or something that it would flow, and that was true when we got there. But after I built 2 of these pyramids outdoors and put them next to that stream bed, it started flowing all the time. And there's a guy in Illinois who built a house built out of a pyramid, for example, and he had to build a moat around his house because this water just started pouring up from the ground all around his pyramidal house. So these impacts are pretty amazing. So
That's good to know. My basement leaks already, so maybe I'll just leave the pyramids outside.
yeah, well, I was going to say, if you have water leaks around your house, you might want to think twice. But actually, we had leaks in our place too, but it was far enough away that it didn't seem to matter. So
Yeah.
Anyway, unless do you want to talk any more about? I could talk about some of the some of the other benefits they put. For example, they had a lot of older oil wells in some of their older fields, and they found that when they put pyramids on kind of nearby these oil wells, that the viscosity of the oil changed dramatically, and they were able to start pumping more oil out of these old oil wells. So that's another fascinating topic.
Wow.
So some people aren't going to be interested in that, but the free energy aspects of this we have not explored yet. But I do know that they would put capacitors. If you're familiar with what a capacitor is, it's a way of storing energy, but they would put capacitors on the top of these pyramids. Not only would they spontaneously charge, but they would blow off the top of the pyramid on their own. So, there's clearly some potential. And I should, by the way, maybe we'll get into this later, but when you look at the Hindu temples, which we're going to talk about, there's information indicating that those were actually free energy devices as well. So we'll get into that a little bit later. So
Charlie, are you familiar with a gentleman named David Childress? He wrote Technology of the Gods.
Yes, I've read the book. Yeah.
He talks about in the Great Pyramid of Giza, the large pyramid, there are actually trace chemicals inside of the pyramid. It's empty now, of course, but there are actually trace chemicals inside. When these chemicals are combined, that it actually generates power, kind of like a battery. It works the same way as the Baghdad batteries.
Right.
Do you think that works as an amplifier, or if it was just something that might have been getting played around with, or if you have to have both of those things to have a massive effect?
I haven't studied the Giza, to the extent that I have this one, but I will say this, that any phi related geometry is going to be producing all these types of energy fields. You may need other enhancements to come up with the electricity, but we'll be talking about ways that an empire that people are now theorizing existed around the world, called the Tartarian Empire, used this geometry of pyramid to generate free energy. So I can't relate it because I just haven't done that research to Giza,
right.
But they are related, and so I bet you I wouldn't at all be surprised that that it would work, you know, there as well. So anyway, switching gears a little bit, I want to show people how the Russians they did research on these pyramids for over the last 30 years. And this research was directed by a engineer named Dr. Alexander Gallad. But they never disclosed the geometry of these pyramids precisely outside of Russia. It's been kept a secret. I've contacted him, and I'm hoping to get back a response. I talked to him around the first of the year and sent him a bunch of questions, and this is the first one on the list. Can you verify the geometry? But I haven't heard back from him, so I don't know if I will. Some people are saying he might, you know, not want to disclose that, and I bet that's not, you know, since I put that as the first question on the list, maybe that's the reason he hasn't gotten back to me. But to get into sacred geometry, just briefly, there's a geometric term which I didn't learn in geometry class, and none of you did either. It's called phi, P-H-I. We've learned pi, P-I, which relates to the circumference of a circle, but phi is something different. As a number, it's 1.618033999, and it continues on. It's an infinite irrational fraction. But what it is, it's essentially a scaling ratio. And if you, not to get into too much detail, but if you divide 1 by 1.618, you end up with 0.618. And if you were to take a piece of board that was 1 inch or 1 foot long, and you divide it in, one piece would be 0.618 of a foot, the other one would be 0.382. Those relationships will stay constant if you try to scale from the minuscule subatomic to the galactic. And nature, as it turns out, uses phi as a scaling ratio. So we'll show examples of that here in a bit. I'll talk about them, but you'll see these examples in nature. So it's obvious that this is an important scaling ratio. So anyway, go ahead.
Sorry, Charles. So if I was to say want to build a pyramid that's a base of 40 feet, so this is how you would scale it, is with dividing by phi.
That's right. And you can take this concept, turn it into angles and dimensions in geometry. That's right. So this is the way I determined it, and you'll see it matches like it fits like a glove. Mm-hmm. With some other things that help to confirm that this is exactly what they did. So, when you do that, you build a pyramid around it, you end up with a geometry that looks, if you look at the diagram on the left, that's the Russian pyramid, the tall one. And then inside of it, that's the Giza pyramid from Egypt. So this is the first confirmation that this was right, because we're going to find some fantastic correlations between this. This also happened. There was a rough estimate out on the internet about the geometry of these Russian pyramids, but it wasn't precise. And when I did this, it was like 0.2 of a degree different than this rough estimate. So first of all, that correlates well. As you see, or if you remember back, I went back and measured to see if it was right with the ruler, and it was right. So I've got a lot of other confirmation here. Let's look at how the Giza pyramid and the Russian pyramid are correlated, because there's one important correlation that cannot be an accident. And that's the fact, if you look at the little the numbers in the middle chart there, the slant angle of the Russian pyramid, and I'll show you what that is 76.345 degrees. And the apex angle of the Great Pyramid in Giza is 76.345 degrees. Now, to 3 significant digits, is that an accident? No, it's not. And you're going to see how this phi relationship develops. So now let's go over to the diagram on the left. If you look at where my cursor is, that's letter F there. The slant angle is the angle that goes from the base up the side of the Russian pyramid to that point C. So it's really that angle AFC is 76.345 degrees. We're going to find that at the top of the Giza pyramid. So if you look at the angle AEF, it's also 76.345 degrees. Again, can't be an accident. And then you look at the relationships of the height. The Russian pyramid, for a base length of 2, has a height of 4.116, which is 2 times the square root of phi cubed. You see phi everywhere in this. The height of the Giza pyramid is 1.272, which is the square root of phi. And the height ratio is 3.236, or 2 times phi. And you do the same thing with the slant height. The slant height of the Russian pyramid is 4.236, which is phi cubed. The slant height of the Giza pyramid is 1.618, which is phi. So the slant height ratio is 2.618, or phi squared. So there's phi everywhere in these geometries.
So how much of a deviation is allowed? Because a 3-place decimal in geometry is a lot. I've been a closed tolerance fabricator for 26 years, and I can't hold a 3-place tolerance on an angle. It's extremely hard without some really good machinery.
Well, and I'm glad you asked the question, because I'm doing this for to show people that mathematically it's precise.
Right.
Now, when you go to build a pyramid, I can't get it that close either. So, and I'm not going to kid anybody about it. I do my very, very best, but, 1/100th of an inch, deviation on my cuts, and I can't do that. I've got a jig, and I, do as best I can, but, it's, if you're off a little bit, it's not going to make much of a difference at all. But I will tell you this. I think I mentioned that we had the geometry kind of in an imprecise fashion at 76.1 degree slant angle. And when you have that big of a difference, 2.5 or 2 to 3/10 of a degree, then you do, when we did a side-by-side analysis with this Lekker antenna, it made a significant difference. But if you're at 6.7633 or 36, or somewhere around there, I don't know that I have any way of precision, in terms of precision, to say that that's going to affect the energy. So
it's not enough to it's not noticeable. The closer you can get, the better, but it's just not noticeable.
So this is and again, the important something to remember: phi itself is an infinite fraction, so you can never get it exactly. So get it as close as you can, and these energy fields will be pretty dramatic. So now in the bottom right-hand corner, because everybody, the first question they say is, boy, this looks so much different than the Giza pyramid, and then I show them this. They say, well, did the Egyptians know about this geometry? Well, if you look over in the bottom right-hand corner, this is a hieroglyph from the Temple of Karnak. And a person from Australia actually put me onto this several years ago and showed me this. And I said, well, gosh, let's measure it and see. And sure enough, it's perfect. It's a perfect match. So all of this is just showing us all this knowledge we got to dig for it, but it's out there. And as more and more people get involved, I don't know I don't have all the answers. People tell me about stuff, and I pick up on it. I ask the universe, quite honestly. I meditate and say, bring me answers, and I get led to find these relationships. So anyway, so there is clearly there's some significant sacred geometric relationships between this pyramid and the Giza pyramid. So now I'm going to just show you some places where you'll find this in ancient architecture. This is one of the obelisks. I believe this particular one was taken from Egypt, but is in Paris, and it has this geometric angle to it. You look at Buddhist temples, or this might be technically a stupa, but all of the Buddhist temples have this kind of conical shape at the top, and it measures perfectly with this geometry as well. Again, indicating that these ancient cultures knew about this. for thousands of years. On the left here is a Hindu temple in southern India. This particular style is called the Dravidian style of architecture. And this is also an example. The slant angle of those temples matches perfectly. As a digression, if you count the number of floors here, you can't see one at the bottom, so you'll have to trust me. There are 13 levels to this. 13 is one of the numbers in the Fibonacci series. And this is actually one of many temples in this complex. There are smaller ones that have 8 levels, some that have 5, some that have 3. And so they're demonstrating that they had a knowledge of the Fibonacci series. And when you convert the Fibonacci series into geometry, it becomes this slant angle. So all of this is just proving that this has been known for thousands of years. On the right is this is the cathedral in Cologne, Germany, but this is just one example of many of the spires, steeples that are on our Gothic cathedrals. And, you know, this up until the 20th century worked its way into a good number of our church steeples as well. Islamic mosques and Jewish synagogues, you know, there are certain ones that also have this geometry as well. Now, this is a picture from northern India. It's harder to see the geometry, but what's interesting is these are, I think, Nagara, I believe is the right term for these. They show a knowledge of fractals. So they knew about fractals, they knew about sacred geometry and so forth, and yet we're supposed to believe that all this knowledge came from the West, you know, when it's been in India for thousands of years. Here's a picture of the 3 Hindu deities, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, and they are wearing headwear that looks to have this same geometry. The Buddha, a lot of times today, it's shown without headwear, but the ancient drawings had the Buddha with headwear as well that match this geometry. And here's an example. This is what most people call the Kremlin. These pictures are from what's called St. Basil's Cathedral. It was made part of the Kremlin during the Soviet Union days. The spire on that cathedral has that angle as well, and you know, that gets us into you know, as a digression for your audience, a book that you know, we talked about this before we started, but there's a burgeoning new area of alternative history that's looking at what's called the Tartarian Empire. When you go back and you look at your world history, you find out that a lot of what we've learned isn't true at all. This empire is on ancient maps and seemed to cover the vast majority of the world at one time. This geometry is found in the steeples and the architecture of these buildings all around the world, and that's, you know, what I'm going to be documenting in the book visually, is how prevalent all of this geometry is in our architecture around the world. But if people are interested in that rabbit hole, there's a new book called The One World Tartarians. I interviewed Jamie Lee about 3 or 4 months ago, and he did a two-hour, you know, abbreviated version of his book. But this will convince you that everything you thought you knew about history is fake. So California is an example. I've got numerous maps going back only 300 years or so that show that California was an island. Well, how many of us ever knew that? And yet there are map after map demonstrating this. So it can't be fake. You know, it's been suppressed information. So a fascinating rabbit hole for people to go down, and one that I've had to explore because this geometry is involved in all of this architecture around the world. And how did they find out? It may have been through the existence of a worldwide empire like this.
I have an extremely ignorant question.
Yeah, well, none of them are.
I'm extremely fascinated in the double slit experiment.
Okay.
The fact that matter can be changed simply by the act of observation.
Yes.
Do these experiments work if they're not being observed? If that makes any sense. Do you have to have an observer to make this work, or do they kind of function on their own?
Mike, that's going to be in the book, as a matter of fact. So I didn't have slides for this, but I'll discuss it. There is an experiment that was done 4 or 5 years ago, kept out of the mainstream press. It was done at the Australian National University, and essentially I'm trying to remember the guy who theorized this. He wanted to do the double slit experiment on a delayed basis, and I can't remember his name, but essentially what he was saying, he was asking the question you're asking. What role does consciousness have to play in determining whether this was a wave or a particle? And so they designed these experiments in such a way that the beam of light would pass through the hole, so to speak, but the decision as to whether or not that was going to be set up to make a wave or a particle didn't occur until after the beam of light had passed through, the photon. Now, and I'm not doing well on this because I should have the article in front of me, but what the results prove is that we live in a multiverse with all these infinite possibilities out there, and that what we end up doing is we reach into the future of all these infinite possibilities, and we end up, through our consciousness, bringing back essentially from the future into the present that reality which we wish to create through
It's
our
almost like you can
consciousness.
the pyramids give you a focal point. It gives you a concentration point. My question is kind of, I don't really know how to phrase it, is once you achieve your focal point, is the pyramid still necessary? If it's driven by consciousness,
Yeah,
because it kind of gives you a keyhole, a spot to look into. But once you've achieved that, is the shape of the pyramid still necessary once you've achieved your focal point?
the pyramid is going to act as both an amplifier and a clarifier of any energy or information field that's contained within it or around it. Now, that's the easy way to answer your question. Now we get into some stuff about harmonics. Phi is important in harmonics because, and let me give you some examples. Let's say you've got your car lights on, and you park your car down the street and you turn the lights on. If there's no fog, you're going to be able to see those lights very easily a block away. But if there's dense, heavy fog, it's going to be tough to see those lights. So the point I'm making there is perception is a function not only of the intensity of the thought, or in this case, or the light, but it's also a function of the clarity of the background in which it is perceived. Okay, does that make some sense? Maybe, hopefully. Phi, as it turns out, because it is an infinite irrational number, clarifies all of the background noise that's in our field of perception. So essentially, that's why and that energy that was out there in the fog, it has to go somewhere, and it ends up being amplified or put into that energy field, or the ray of light, so to speak, or the information field. So it's amplified, and the background noise is clarified. So, what you find is that the pyramid in and of itself, this geometry, creates this ability to amplify. When I sit down and meditate, and I ask for information on questions like yours. Well, it doesn't take very long for me to get a download and say, okay, I got to go over here and look at this or that. So yeah, there's something that's going on there but it's due to, again, the geometry. It clarifies and amplifies. You get into harmonics and you think about, well, if you've ever watched, did you play a guitar or play the piano, that, a guitar string or piano, you pluck the string and it vibrates. And if you clamp it in the middle, it's going to, half the length, you're going to have an octave higher, but the point where you're pressing it together, that it's not vibrating. Well, you need phi to make those nodes, because it clears out all of the vibrational fields that are around the number phi, and that's what allows for the amplification of the, say, the middle C chord that you're playing from the piano.
It gets rid of the fog.
It gets rid of that's it in a simplistic way. Yeah, it gets rid of the fog, and that fog helps to amplify the standing wave that exists. Kozarev, the scientist that I mentioned from Russia, he loved Faust, and so when he would listen to Faust, he had these crude torsion field generator devices, and if he was just reading a regular book, he might get a little movement in the dial. But when he was reading Faust, which he was quite passionate about, the thing would just go crazy. So that was because there was an intensification and amplification of his emotion, his consciousness into the field. And so the pyramid kind of acts as an artificial tool to help with that. Kind of like prayer, the ministers, I forgot which one of you guys is the Southern Baptist guy, but those
We were all
preachers,
grown
yeah,
up
okay.
that way.
The preachers love to be
We're all
passionate.
grew up like that.
Yeah, they're passionate with their voice, and that's because emotion has an enhancing effect on the energy field around it. So anyway,
That makes sense. The clearing of the fog makes a lot of sense to me, because it rings true, because a lot of what I research and look into now is basically removing a veil.
There you go.
Things I look for, it's you have to get rid of the crap, and
Yeah.
we've had so much crap piled on top of us. It takes a lot of digging.
Another case in point for people who have psychic abilities, for example, we had psychics have used this, and the first thing they say, and mediums and so forth, they can, and distance healers, they can clear through the fog and identify the disease or whatever causing an illness, or they can connect with the person on the other side much better clarity as a result of sitting underneath the pyramid and being inside this clarified energy field. So it's all interesting, fascinating stuff.
I like that. That rings with me. I try not to take everything that's spoon fed to me. I teach my boys, even if I tell you something, check me. Double check me. If it doesn't ring true with you, check me out. Don't believe me. I didn't raise my boys in church because I wanted them to find their own spiritual path.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was a mistake, or I don't know if it was good or bad. Not sure, but from what I'm seeing, if we allow ourselves to acquire the tools naturally to remove the fog, then we're going to have a lot better experience at figuring shit out on our own.
Well, there you go.
That's one of the hardest things to do, is be able to figure out things, because I don't like taking people's word for it. When Tony first told me about this meeting, I was like, man, I don't know if I buy into all this. But when you start talking about when you start talking about removing the fog and creating focal points, so just as using pyramids as a tool, that makes more sense to me, because it's not that it wouldn't work without the pyramid just helps it work.
That's right. And it does, the geometry, is in and of itself an energy generator. But yes, for our consciousness and so forth, yeah, if you were probably an experienced yogi master, you wouldn't, or meditator, you wouldn't necessarily need this, but I'm not, and probably you guys aren't that
Not even
either.
close.
But even the monks who go to the pyramids in Russia say that they love to meditate inside of them because of the field. So and I got a lot of people who say the same thing. They feel energy, experience. People who are far better at that than I am say that they experience higher realms, and the clarity of what they're experiencing is driven by the energy field. So anyway, so to continue on, I was just going to show you some examples of this geometry. This is again, this is a hieroglyph from the Temple of Karnak in Egypt. On the right, this is actually from the Mayan calendar, or people call it the Aztec sun calendar. But you notice the similarity. The geometry is exactly the same. You see that little kind of cutout in the middle and so forth. You can't tell me that this didn't come from either a worldwide culture or a civilization that was able to go around the world and bring this information to other cultures. So this is a city called Bagan, Myanmar. You can see all the beautiful temples in this city. I'd love to go see this, but again, this is an example of how information has been suppressed and kind of changed to hide its real meaning. Bagan, if it sounds like pagan, that's because this city used to be called Pagan, and now it's called Bagan because I guess they didn't want us to know the origin of the term pagan in Christianity. Pagan is, when I grew up, and pagans were just horrible people. I didn't know what they had done wrong, but boy, I knew they were bad because they didn't believe in God. So at least the God that I was taught to believe in. So, but that's the origin of this term. There's geometry in these temples. A lot of them are different, but I did find one on the right that matched it. And I can tell you that this culture, I'm sure, knew so much more about geometry and harmonics and healing with these temples than we do now. But it's a source of inspiration to keep searching to figure out what all they, it'd be fascinating to find out what they really knew back in the day. This is the Mormon temple in Salt Lake City. All of the spires on that temple have the same geometry. The founders of the Mormon Church, Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, were both Masons. And this information, of course, has been kept by the Knights Templar, the Masons, and so forth over time, and they've sort of been the keepers of this information over time. So fully demonstrated in the Mormon Temple in Salt Lake.
Do you run into any feedback or any kind of backlash from the Templar, or not the Templars, but from the Masons or anybody from the Scottish Rite or anything like that over your research?
And not that I know of yet.
Wait for it.
But I'm just taking what's hiding in plain sight and putting it out there. So I mean, if that's
actually reading an article right now while we're talking about the number pattern in pine cones, because pine cones, it's used in masonry, it's used in religion, and it's a Fibonacci sequence in pine cones.
That's right, it is.
I had no idea.
I didn't put the close-ups in here, but those are pine cones on the top of those smaller spires. So you're right.
And the pine cone.
Here's an interesting one that will get us kind of.
And the pine
What's
cone.
that?
And the pine cone represents the pineal gland as well.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. And so, I know there's a connection there. That's why I call my pyramid Stargate. I mean, for people who are sensitive to this stuff, I mean, it really is kind of an interdimensional, access point. So here's some pictures of the Wardenclyffe Tower that Nikola Tesla made. And this was the tower that was supposed to be used to, send free electricity from Colorado to this one. This was in Long Island, and they were going to be able to Tesla said to transmit energy to planes, boats, anything over without wires, throughout the world. A viewer sent me this. If you look on the right, this is what's called Solomon's Lesser Key. And what this person did, of course, they all have the same geometry. So let's start with that. But she did an overlay of this geometry with the Key of Solomon. And, it looks like, Tesla may have used this as a model to model his Wardenclyffe Tower from. So I don't know what else to make of that. But I will tell you, here's another interesting aspect. Tesla Motors, this is their logo. And sure enough, you find this geometry even in their logo. So, there's something going on there. But before we continue, I'll talk, I didn't put it in today, but if we go back to those Hindu temple drawings or temples, there's an interesting YouTube researcher named Praveen, Praveen Mohan, Mohan. And that's the name of his YouTube channel. It's all one word, Praveen Mohan. He has demonstrated, or he's done a lot of research, that the ancient Hindu and Buddhist temples may in fact have been energy generating plants. So again, and he's shown that, for example, some of these temples that are supposed to be Hindu temples, when you go up to the very top level, like that 13-story one I showed you, you see there's actually a statue of the Buddha there. Well, what's that doing there? But so there's a lot of stuff to find out. But the key takeaway is, just as these pyramids with this geometry in Russia have shown to be able to produce free energy, he demonstrates that a lot of these ancient temples may have been used for that very same purpose originally. So interesting. Now here's some examples in nature. I was kind of shocked to find this, but if you look at sailboat racing sails, they have the same slant angle, but probably more precision. When you look at on the left, this is a diagram of light refraction, and this was a study that was done by a researcher. He took a pipe and put a glass sphere at the end of it, and then he shone light through it, and he wanted to see what the angle of refraction would be on the light, and guess what? It's 76.34 degrees. So, you're just finding it everywhere. Then on the right, this is an old college megaphone. When I went to college, they didn't have the electronic ones, and this was what they used, and sure enough, same geometry. So amplifies and clarifies, but it's there. Now DNA, same thing. It's in our DNA, literally in our DNA. This slant angle. So we see it everywhere. Here's another example of this geometry and the suppression of it by the church. On the left is something called a dunce cap. For those who are old enough to remember or have parents who taught them about it, back in the day, if you were a bad student in school or a slow learner, they had a dunce cap, and it looked kind of like the thing on the left, and you'd have to go sit in the corner as punishment with this hat on and be the subject of ridicule and so forth. Well, the dunce cap actually originated from a 13th century Franciscan monk named John Duns Scotus. And he was a contemporary of St. Francis of Assisi and was highly regarded, at least in his early days, like a peer of St. Francis. But he started wearing witch hats, again, same geometry. He started wearing those and realized that he had a kind of a connection, or better connection, to his higher self, to God, whatever you want to call it. And so he developed a concept of a metaphysical God. And that was not taken very well by the Catholic Church. And so they started to ridicule his work and turned the Dunce Cap, which was really a source of spiritual enlightenment for him, into an object of ridicule. So, that way, once again, it's hiding in plain sight. So
wouldn't this likely backfire though? I mean, if you've got a kid that's bad and you put something on his head that helps him reach his higher self, I mean, aren't we ultimately just helping that kid along?
Well, that's you're right. Of course you are. And, I don't know what made it kind of go away, but this reached its peak in Victorian England, and, it's kind of petered out, but, it was there for a long, long time. And, but I think you're right. Once people, that's my hope. Once people start to use these things, they get a little healthier. They realize, they can manifest a little faster, that kind of stuff. I'll say, oh, look at that. This really works. So you're right. Now I may lose the audience who are non-science majors here, but I think this is perhaps the most important research that I've done, other than figuring out the geometry itself of the pyramid. And that has to do with what's called the Platonic Solids. Plato is ascribed to have been the person to develop the knowledge of these 5 forms. And they're shown here on this page: the tetrahedron, octahedron, hexahedron, which is what we call a cube, the icosahedron, and the dodecahedron. And these forms have or at least have been theorized to be involved in the process of creation. And I want to kind of give context to your audience for that. I grew up, in the church, and I was taught that if I pray to God, that, if he answers my prayers, that I would deem it a miracle, that would happen. And so I never really thought about whether there was a process involved, a creative process. And when I got older and I started attending metaphysical churches, that's kind of where my enlightenment started, or at least, part of it. I started to think of that in a different way. I said, well, if my thoughts create my experience, there must be a process for that to occur. So with that as background, a gentleman named Buckminster Fuller, who some of you may have heard of, but he was a futurist in the 20th century. He developed geodesic domes, and that's what he's best known for, because they're so strong. And but he developed what he called the Jitterbug Theory, and he essentially devised a theory that with certain forces applied to these geometric forms, that they would go from one form to the other. And in fact, just as keys on the piano, this process would repeat itself in octaves, of course, getting larger and smaller. So that's kind of where, this technology or this knowledge has stopped at this point. But I was, here's an example also, by the way, of geometry creating, or sound creating geometry. This is an interesting digression, but we need to understand that all of these things, numbers can become geometry, geometry can become harmonics, and so forth. One of the things that Fuller did for his students, he had them blow up balloons and put them in like a pot of red dye and hold them up, and they would subject them to different frequencies. And this is what happened when, depending upon the frequency that they played at, these balloons, they would dry into these various geometric shapes. So it kind of proves that vibration will become geometry. And so, that's an important, thing to understand here. There is a process that, all of this stuff that we really haven't had much of a grasp on in the past. What's interesting too, these are old stone carvings from, I think this is Scotland, but they were in Scotland, Ireland, northern parts of France. And these are like 3000 BC. So we knew about the, these ancient civilizations knew about the Platonic solids thousands of years before Plato. Once again, showing that our history just isn't what we were told it was. So we know now that there was ancient knowledge of this information, and we have at least a general theory. Well, let's take it to contemporary society. These are electron micrographs, and you can see these are what are called microclusters. And these are kind of an intermediate state between the ether and matter. So this shows that these that matter coalesces into these geometric forms in some way, in some pattern, and it's intimately involved in the creative process. So we're getting like bits and pieces here of a puzzle. I happened to read this book called Sacred Geometry, Philosophy, and Practice last fall as I started to write the book, because I didn't know much about sacred geometry, and but anyway, I learned a lot from it. This diagram on the left is a picture. It's on the very last page of this book, and you can see the geometric figures. These 5 Platonic forms are in this diagram, and they're all encircled by these various circles or spheres. But this is 2-dimensional. The author gave you no really context on this at all, but I decided, well, maybe this is a 3-dimensional diagram in 2 dimensions. So I decided to plot it. And I said, well, what geometry should I use? And I said, well, just for the hell of it, let's plot it in the geometry of the pyramid. And sure enough, lo and behold, sure, you can take 9 circles that get smaller and they will all fit inside there in some form or fashion. So I know critics would immediately say, well, that doesn't prove anything. But when you start to find that the midpoints and the bases of one circle are meeting exactly at the location of other circles, that can only happen inside this geometry. So I found 2 examples of that. And I don't want to, keep doing too much geometry here, but when you start to look at the relationships between the base and the apex and the midpoints of these spheres in 3 dimensions, and you look at these relationships, these geometric ratios start to pop out, like the square root of 2, the number 2, which is a doubling, arithmetic progression number, another square root of 2, square root of 3, and phi all show up in these. There's no way that can happen except by accident. If one of them happened, you might call it an accident, but to have 7 of these show up in that way, there's no way that could happen unless this ancient diagram, which we don't even know the origin of, is trying to show us that this is a pathway of the creative process. So this is a work in progress, but that to me is fascinating, in and of itself. When you look at the Mandelbrot set, are any of you familiar with fractals in the Mandelbrot set? The Mandelbrot set, these circles, they increase with what's called a phi cubed relationship. Well, I don't know if you remember back to the geometry I showed you, the pyramid, but sure enough, phi cubed is in the height to base length ratio. So it's there. And here's another drawing on the right. This is a 12th or 13th century diagram or picture called God as the architect of the universe. And what's fascinating about this is we supposedly only discovered the Mandelbrot set in 1970. Renoir Mandelbrot is attributed to this. And no doubt he's the first contemporary person to know it. Well, look at that diagram. Doesn't that black area look in many respects similar to a fractal or the Mandelbrot set? And so I saw this compass, and I, of course, now, have angle, got to measure it. So I measured it, and sure enough, spot on, that the slant angle of that compass is 76.34 degrees. Are they trying to tell us something? Don't know, but I think so, because so much of religious literature is infused, and architecture and so forth is infused with this knowledge. So here's a depiction. We're getting close to the end here, folks, so I hope I haven't bored too many people, but
No,
this is my
absolutely not.
depiction of how the creative process is really working. Nassim Haramein is the biggest proponent of, and has popularized the concept of the torus. It's an energy field that kind of spins in and out of itself. You suck energy in at the bottom, it comes out the top, and it just continues spiraling in this toroidal form. And so what I think is happening, I've got the pyramid sitting here. The top of the pyramid to me is that center point, that 0 point in the torus. And it's the place where all the magic happens. Time and space start to collapse. We've measured with the Lekker antenna a frequency called unity. And the people who make this antenna will tell you that you don't find this hardly at all. But we find that frequency at the top of the pyramid because everything's spinning so fast there that apparently time and space come together. And that's why we get that reading of unity. So that's kind of just a visualization of what we think the creative process really looks like.
Charlie, and I think you said this before, is that energy spinning clockwise or counterclockwise in that pyramid?
It's
coming from
question.
the base.
And I'll tell you what, why don't I'm going to stop the share here so I can kind of show people visually. There's something called the right hand rule. So if you take a pen and hold it in your hand like this, if your thumb is pointing up, that's the direction of flow. The way your fingers are wrapping around it is the direction of flow of the field, of the torsion field. So coming up out of the earth are torsion fields that, again, abide by this right hand rule and are spinning this way. But on top of the pyramid are energy fields that are coming down this way. So this is getting into more complex stuff, but there's actually a double torus going on. There's another torus, toroidal field coming down this way, and there's one coming up, and they spin in different directions. You've heard of masculine and feminine energy, yin and yang, and so forth. One is a centripetal force, and one is a centrifugal force. So and all of that is involved in the development of the torus. But yeah, there's two different energy fields, and they spin in different directions. So anyhow,
That's awesome.
Yeah, so let me see if there's anything else I want to talk about here. But we've done, I don't know if you guys are concerned about, I think you should be, EMFs.
Yes.
But we've done studies, there's at least 7,000 articles that have been published that indicate electromagnetic radiation, causing disease in our culture. So, when we look at things like autism and EMF sensitivity, all of these things, I mean, whatever it may be, the EMF's environment that we live in is exacerbating all of these kinds of things. So we are beginning to do some research. We're putting together a group of people who are EMF sensitive. We have a whole bunch of things to test all this. But one of the recent tests we did, we took, I had an expert dowser work with me on this, and we did some testing of my life force energy when I had a cell phone in my hand with a YouTube video going. And you can see here, when I did that, my life force outside, this is all a relative scale. So don't take the numbers, just look at the relative values to try to appreciate this, because the numbers themselves are just meant as placeholders for relative intensity. But my life force was cut in half when I had that cell phone in my hand. With the YouTube going on. So that tells you, and for all of you who are sitting around, I have my whole house hardwired with an inexpensive way to do it. You don't have to do Ethernet cable all through your house, but if you get rid of Wi-Fi, that's another major cause of EMFs in your home. But anyway, all of those things are going to drag down your life force, and that's going to wreck your immune function. Much less, worrying about, are there specific frequencies that are put into that may cause disease and so forth, which is a whole separate topic. But when you sit inside the pyramid and or use other enhancements such as we did with the coil, your life force energy, even in the presence of EMFs, goes up. So we're doing some research right now with people. Oh, I didn't want to show that till the end. Who are EMF sensitive, and we're going to be seeing what kind of results we get from that. So now here's the last picture, and I'll leave this one for you guys to figure out. But one of my board members sent me this picture. He moved from Hawaii to California, and he didn't have his pyramid. He left his pyramids in Hawaii, so I sent him one. He put it up, and he went outside to take a picture with his friend or for a friend at night, and this is what he got. So this is some kind of plasma energy that's obviously being attracted to this pyramid. This is an unretouched photograph, and I'll just leave it to everybody else for comment. But something is clearly going on that he could not see, by the way, with his unaided eye when he took this photograph. So, but it came out in the picture. So that's basically it. So we can talk about any topics you guys want to talk about now, but that's kind of what I've got for prepared slides.
Charlie, in that last photo, what was the PVC tube coming down from the apex?
Okay, that's an excellent question. I didn't go into that. We've been doing studies on what are called Caduceus coils.
Oh, it's Caduceus coil.
If you think about, again, hiding in plain sight, what is the symbol of our healthcare? It's a pole with two serpents spiraling around it, the Caduceus coil.
Mm-hmm.
Now, scientists have a number of scientists, Sir Roger Penrose, Stuart Hameroff, Constantine Weil, Fritz Albert Popp. We got a lot of scientists that have studied DNA, and what they found is that the DNA communicates information, receives and transmits energy and information through scalar waves. Caduceus coils produce scalar waves. So what we have been doing is trying, and we're going to be testing as well, sound healing using the Caduceus coil rather than listening to them on your cell phone on a frequency app or on a YouTube video or something like that. We actually take a cord and attach it to the coil, and those frequencies are then transmitted inside the pyramid as scalar waves, and it does amplify that energy field. We did a study last year doing healing work during the beginning days of COVID, where we had 50 people. Of course, nobody knows who has COVID, and we still don't. I don't care if you take a test or not, but we took 50 people with flu-like symptoms, and they were able to heal themselves. And that's the key thing here. We provided the information, the energy that was necessary for them to heal. They did a 20 or 30-minute session. Every one of them, the symptoms were gone. The aches and pains, the runny nose, the fever, whatever it may have been. So we know that this is going to be interesting. He just put it up there. I don't know why he did that, but it wasn't connected to any frequency generator or anything like that. And that may have had something to do with it. I don't know. We got to do more testing to figure that out.
But I have a question.
Go back to something real quick. Is go ahead, Tony.
With that Caduceus coil, because I built one from your video, or I'm starting to build one. One thing that I was unclear about is the two wires at the end. Are you keeping those wires separate, or are they connected together?
No, I guess I didn't put that in the how-to video. Yeah, you ought to tie them together, kind of, twist them together, and then the alligator clip goes on both.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I wonder did he hang it from there? Because if you would lay that Caduceus coil on the ground, does that affect the frequency of the wires vibrating?
I've started to do some testing on that myself. I put it on the floor. I've also held it like in my lap.
Uh-huh.
I haven't put it up there yet because I need to get a longer piece of cord to hook it up. To be
Yeah.
honest, I got to get it in the shop. But there's a lot of stuff going on here, and I don't sometimes have the time to get it done in a hurry. But you know, it seems like it makes a little bit. It improved. I can feel it more if it's sitting in my lap.
Uh-huh.
So maybe having contact with the body is preferable, but I just haven't done the full research to
Yeah.
find that out. And we are going to be testing that with a group, you know, in the coming few weeks and months. So, you know, I'll have more to come, you know, on that answer.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. You spoke earlier. This is going way back. You speak of the ether.
Yeah.
Now, in the context that you use the ether, is it the space that isn't occupied by matter? Is that how you are you defining the ether, or is it an actual its own substance, its own particle? Explain explain to someone who has absolutely zero clue what you mean by that.
That's fine.
No clue.
I hope I will do justice to a topic that's over my head too, but the ether we perceive of the space between, say, me and this pole here as empty space. That's the way we've been taught to think, breathe, and live our life. There is more energy in the palms of my hands than would be necessary to boil off all of the oceans on the planet and bring them, you know, to the boiling point and boil them off. So we live in a world seething with energy. What we don't understand is that what we consider to be concrete reality is actually frozen energy. And that this starts to get back to, you know, this subject of how do we create? Well, my belief at the moment is that, you know, this pipe over here is created at, you could call it a oh goodness, what's the term? I've forgotten. Anyway, it's a point where oh gosh, I'm frozen.
Yeah. Welcome to the club.
Anyway, it's the point where the empty space, because of harmonics, that the standing wave is frozen in space, and it literally locks stuff into physical form. So this what we consider to be event horizon. That's it. This is an event horizon. But this standing wave that forms this pipe, all of that there's really no more matter per se in this pipe than there is in the empty space. It's just that it's been frozen. We are walking through this sea of energy because of it's easily permeable. But, you know, for example, I mean, to get into gravity, now we're getting into more, you know, torsion physics and quantum physics. But, you know, our current concept of physics can't explain gravity, and it can't explain a lot of other effects. But gravity is the difference between the torsion fields pushing down on the Earth, compensated by this corresponding field of energy coming up from the center of the Earth. So gravity is really just kind of X minus Y, which is, you know, the push down effect counterbalanced by the push up effect. And that's where we can, you know, when you understand spins and so forth, if you spin something in a counterclockwise direction, that's what Victor Schauberger was working on, for the Nazis. He was forced to, but he understood these spirals and so forth. They were getting, aircraft that could fly with just based on spin and so forth. So it gets, I mean, this is another rabbit hole that, believe me, I don't have a PhD in any of this stuff. So
I don't even have a GED in this stuff. So.
Well, anyway, but yeah. And I apologize earlier for having a brain freeze here, but yeah, essentially objects are nothing more than this event horizon where we've got a pattern of this created by these toroidal fields that freezes energy in a specific location. But Nassim Haramein, for example, has proven that that all of the matter so-called in the universe could fit inside of like an atom. There's just so little what we call hard matter. This is just a construct. But this is just the ether frozen in space. So I don't know if that helps.
That's very simplified. Thank you for simplifying that for me.
Glad this isn't my PhD thesis.
That's kind of like the CIA document they released recently about researching astral travel and all of that. And what they were saying is that essentially every wavelength of energy that we have that you can see, like you're touching the poles next to you, every bit of that on the top of that wavelength and on the bottom of the wavelength, the top 25% and the bottom 25% is actually it's undetectable. Like we can't see it. Mm-hmm. So we can only see a range of that wavelength, and what we're seeing and what we call a solid is just that part that we can interact with in this, they call it dimension or whatever.
Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to say, for example, that last photograph with the plasma or whatever you want to call it. I mean, you're right. We only see within a very narrow spectrum of the total, and here within a very narrow spectrum of this total spectrum of frequencies. Mm-hmm. Planets are made with waves that may have an amplitude, or excuse me, a wavelength of millions of miles, billions of miles, and then we can get down to having billions of them in a millimeter. So you're right, but it's all frequency, it's all vibration, and how that information can be processed and stored and amplified. I mean, again, to use that analogy I tried to use earlier about the car beam, in the fog, when you think about reality, or excuse me, phi and its relationship in creating reality, it up until, if you're familiar with the Fibonacci series, you can take, for example, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. If you take 2 divided by 1, you get a whole number. Let's take the next one, which is 3 divided by 2. You get a fraction, a whole fraction, 1.5. 8 divided by 5 is a fraction, and so forth. Well, that works up until you get past 13 over 8, because that's, I think, 1.625, as I remember. But after that, and you start taking those ratios beyond that point, you get infinite irrational fractions. So what apparently happens, and this is part of the harmonics theory that I'm trying to learn better, but once you get close to the physical reality, which is these smaller numbers, and they broaden out into reality, there the Fibonacci series has a totally different effect. It's creating, but in the higher dimensions, higher frequencies, higher numbers, that irrational number, as I mentioned before, that any irrational number is going to clarify all of the background noise away. It's going to clear out the fog. So in the higher dimensions, it's clearing the fog until it gets to like this magic number 13. So at least the the harmonics theory that's out there says that this is really important, and that's part of the reason, because you end up no longer having these irrational numbers, that we get the physical reality that we experience. I mean, it's very complex and heady.
It's like the chaos theory. You only are able to obtain patterns through chaos. Chaos, it actually creates the patterns itself. So once you go so far down, it's going to start creating patterns over and over again. And that's when you get what you see around us. It's where your patterns come from. It's from chaos. Yeah. And there's plenty of chaos around. I don't know if it's been too loud or I've got plenty of chaos affecting my house right now.
So
Charles, real quick, something you touched on at the beginning. So you were showing the difference between the Giza pyramid and the Russian pyramid.
Yeah.
So why the Giza pyramid having the 76.34 at the bottom versus the top?
Well, it has it on the top, yeah, as opposed to the.
I'm sorry, yeah, the other way around.
That's okay. That's okay. I can only speculate, but I think that those pyramids may have been there for a purpose of doing something with the earth or getting something from the earth, as opposed to having an effect on the field around it. That's my guess, but I don't know yet. I keep, that's just one I haven't gotten the answer to yet. But it's kind of like if you tilted the pyramid over on its side, it wouldn't quite be 90 degrees, it would be a little bit more. Well, then you kind of find the geometry in a different way. But I don't know. I honestly don't know. And there are people who study the Great Pyramids of Giza, the Bosnian pyramids, and so forth. And I don't really do that. They may have they should have better answers than I do for that question.
So the Giza pyramid, probably for doing something for healing the earth or bringing energy into the earth, and then the more of the angle of the Russian pyramid or the temples was more of healing or clarification, I guess, for whatever it would be.
Well, it could be. Yeah. It's obviously also used for generation of free energy. So, and healing. Yeah. So I think you got to look to the function of them, but obviously the same geometric principles are being applied, and so it's just a theory that it's probably either doing something to the earth or taking energy from the earth and using that as the basis of its performance or something.
Well, maybe if we tear down the Giza pyramid, then Egypt turns back into a lush grassland instead of a desert.
Well, God only knows. I don't think we're going to be tearing that thing down anytime.
No, I hope not. It was totally a joke, but
well, no, I know, but what's funny is you don't know. I mean, and let me kind of say why I'm joking about it, because it was oriented to north when it was built, or magnetic north, and now it's not. So sometimes just subtle changes and things like that can change the energetics and what it does to its environment. I was gonna state this. I mean, there are any pyramid, like any other form of healing or technology, can be used for good or for evil, and it doesn't take much to change that. I'll use a frequency, for example. Let's just pick a frequency, 1011. Well, that turns out in some, versions to be of solfeggio frequency. And how do you know that? Because the digits add up to 3. If they add up to 3, 6, or 9, it's going to be a solfeggio frequency. If you got more than 10, you have to reduce, and But anyway, but 1010 wouldn't be a solfeggio frequency, and it might be harmful. So you just don't know. A concrete example of this for your viewers, if you want to go, you can go see this on the website that Dr. Galad maintains on these pyramids. It's in Russian, so you have to use Google Chrome or Brave or someplace where you can use a translate function. But Dr. Galad on pyramids.ru, there's a Q&A with him, and just sort of out of the blue, they say, well, describe to us what you know about the pyramid that was on the Maidan in the Ukrainian Revolution in 2014. I call it a coup, but we'll call it revolution for the time being. And turns out, of course, a lot of his research is, and in fact, he was from Ukraine originally, but they were from Kiev, and they apparently programmed a pyramid, one of these Russian pyramids, in such a way as to incite violence during that period on the square in Kiev. So it just shows you anything like that can be used for good or for evil. So
yeah, well, I mean, like Tilly was talking about earlier, everything we know or we thought we knew has been some kind of fabricated lie, and it's not a far-fetched theory or whatever you want to call it to say that at some point somebody thought, what, these pyramids are going to keep us from being in control. You can't sell Tesla power, and so why not convince the people to build this grand Giza? Well, we intentionally built it upside down, which has some kind of reversing effect. I mean, I'm going off on like a far-fetched conspiracy theory, but Egypt wasn't always a desert, and now it's just sand. And
that's right. So what did that? And could it be? And I was to kind of get back to that. I mean, it's just a wild theory, but could the change in magnetic north and its impact on the energetics of the pyramid have an impact? I don't know. Obviously, the Sphinx. I mean, all the data shows that there was erosion on that thing. So the climate has clearly changed from the time those things were built. So I don't know.
Well, and that leads into another, I guess, my last question for you. But setting these pyramids in some kind of geological direction. How important is that? Which direction should they face? And should the north be a flat wall versus a corner? Or because if we're going to build a big ass pyramid on our property, I don't want to build it twice.
No, that's right. Measure and place once, build, or measure twice.
Measure twice, cut once.
Build once. Yeah. So the best information that seems to be out there is that these, and at least for these smaller pyramids, magnetic north seems to be the right orientation. And what that means is if let me draw it on a piece of paper here, but if your pyramid if that's your pyramid and magnetic north is that way, that's the way you want to orient the pyramid. So
okay, and by orient, do you mean that's where my front door needs to be?
No, that's the way, that's the direct, this is the base of the pyramid.
Yeah.
And if this is north, pointing that way, that's the way you want to orient your pyramid.
So basically any flat wall facing exactly due north.
That's right. That's right. Any flat wall. That's exactly right. Exactly right. Now, we happen to live in a home where that works. The previous home we lived in did not. And so I had it literally like about a 45-degree angle to the walls to orient it to magnetic north. But that's right. That would be the answer. In terms of location on a property, we're in the midst of we're in the process of beginning to build a public pyramid. We've got some funding through our foundation for this, and we are also checking for ley lines, Hartmann lines. This is out of my area of expertise, but my significant other does that with the Lekker antenna. So, we went out 2 weeks ago and at least cited the location to make sure that there weren't any negative energy fields in the ground around the pyramid. The other important thing to realize is that all of the big pyramids around the world are based on their location in relation to the longitude and latitude on the Earth. And people have done studies of this, but these lines of energy, if you remember back to that picture I showed from from Buckminster Fuller, all these geometric lines and so forth showing up in the circles with a certain frequency was applied. There are you can find that all of these energy fields are excuse me, sacred sites and pyramids and so forth around the world are placed at locations that reflect the existence of icosahedron and dodecahedron locations on a sphere. So I think it's 19.7. I don't remember, but you know, when you look at these latitude lines, you can find these people have done all of that study, and they fit into these Platonic solid forms, you know, that in fact do seem to have as their focal points these you know, points of intersection of the Platonic solids. So yeah, it's
Charles,
all
I have,
that.
I have one last question. And then I'll leave you alone with my boring, uneducated questions. But in the pyramid, you spoke about the effects of using a cell phone inside the pyramid as outside of the pyramid, and you know, going in with no electronic devices or any EMF issues. Have there been any studies on the benefits to mental health inside of the pyramids?
The study, I think, the most important, the work that's documented, you know, as I mentioned, like the prison study, indicates that anger issues can be dealt with. There are other issues, and this may not be totally on point, but there's other research that was done on addiction issues, you know, violence issues, and so forth. So there is some research that deals with these, but not as much as we'd like, and you know, we'd like to.
It seems like we're turned upside down. You have a lot of people with identity crisis. I think when you remove the identity from human beings, whether it's racial, cultural, religious, whatever aspect you have, when you start removing these identities from people, that you wind up with a lot of confused people.
Right.
I don't know if the EMF radiation has anything to do with it. I have no clue, but I do know that, you know, we're seeing a lot of things in the last 5 to 10 years that you would have never thought about. I'm not going to, you know, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I don't want to use any terminology that's, you know, that would get this flagged, but there's a lot of things that are really, really crazy right now that you just look at. It's like you're looking at a movie. It's almost like a reality show.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just don't know if didn't know if there had been any studies on helping with the insanity. Anger issues aside, you know, the calming effect. I understand the calming effects of meditation and objects.
Right. I do not know. You know, there hasn't been any research from Russia that I know of, and you know, these are. You can see. I mean, the possibilities are endless. But yeah, I don't think it's been done yet.
Okay.
It needs to be done.
Yeah, I think that's our major health crisis right now. I mean, we have a whole population walking around with masks on just because someone told them to.
That's right. Yeah.
I was polite. I wore a mask. I go to the grocery store. You know, I was raised by my grandmother. I don't like seeing little old ladies that are scared. And yesterday I had a moment of clarity where I threw it away. I said, I'm not going to do that. It's crazy. It's insanity.
It is insane.
And I don't know where this is coming from, but I think we all got together because we're looking for ways of, you know, as a generic term, self-help.
Yeah.
But that's a broad stroke. We want to be completely independent of the medical system, completely dependent of the brainwash system of the politics of what we see come across the screen that we're looking at right now.
Yeah.
And if there's any way of blocking that, or because you have a generation of kids that come up and think this is normal, you know, they see this, you know, we stick a device in their hand and we tell them, you know, go play, and wonder why they're losing their minds.
Well, I know.
And we're all looking for ways around this, I guess.
Sure,
We're
sure.
trying to negate the effects.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, the pyramids, do they work? Do they radiate? I guess do they, like if you put 10 pyramids in a subdivision?
Yeah.
Just because you don't spend your time meditating, are there any beneficial?
Oh yeah. Okay. I think what you're
benefits to that?
asking is that, yeah, the direct kind of the extent of the field effect and so forth.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. Again, measuring these is challenging, but we've used the Lekker antenna to identify, qualitatively the field effect. The pyramid that I'm sitting in has a field effect, that at least covers the room that I'm sitting in. The field effect is going to decrease as you go further out away from it, and I think that kind of makes sense. But the Russians were able to use radar detection and some other devices to measure the energy fields, and they built some that were about 44 meters high. That's about 130 feet, something like that. And they were able to detect the field at least 50 kilometers away.
Wow.
We have done, and here's one that'll be maybe of interest, because there was a researcher up in northern Canada 2 winters ago who got in touch with me, and he did a real ingenious thing. It was winter, it was below freezing in the wintertime up there all the time. He took a whole bunch of Pyrex glasses and he put water in them, and he put red dye in there and stirred it up. And he placed these at various distances from this pyramid, the Russian pyramid that he built outside in his farm. And he went around to see what impacts the field had on these bowls of water. What's fascinating is that the dye coalesced, even though he started up in the water. When he would go back, the dye had coalesced into a spiral up to 11 miles away from his house. And it had little vortices, sticking out, little whiskers or whatever, but it was all concentrated in the middle. And also, even though it was well below freezing, the water in the center of, where that red dye, in the middle of that vortex, would not freeze.
Wow.
Go figure, But he did it. He did the experiment, and other people have replicated it. So, the field effect is pretty large. We actually had a psychic last year and a dowser who, the psychic was kind of working remotely, but this guy had a Caduceus coil playing solfeggio frequencies inside the pyramid, and he got in his car, and they did the same thing. They doused to see how far out the field was impacting the environment, and it was about 10 to 11 miles. We have this on a video. They're driving out. Now, the woman who's the psychic, she wasn't in the car, but she was kind of doing it remotely with him. And they both ended up with the same basic answers, that, that field went out for a good long distance. So, they have put these up in urban areas around Moscow, and the amount of infectious diseases in that, general area, for a good distance around, decreases dramatically in the presence of the pyramid. I don't know if I mentioned it personally, but I used to get, before I started building these, usually like clockwork in January, right after the holidays, I'd get a chest cold or some kind of upper respiratory infection, and I'd hack my brains out for a month, until maybe February. And I'd always be grateful, because it seemed like come around February 1st, after a month, I'd finally stop hacking for 15 minutes every morning when I got up. Well, I haven't had a sniffle since, since I made these. So, there's all this data, but it's anecdotal, and that's why we're trying to, get some hard data. But yeah, the field effect is pretty amazing. And, you know, to think what kind of a culture and society we might have, and public, you know, this could be the cheapest public health, you know, benefit on the planet if we just do the research and see if we could replicate what happened in that situation with the respiratory, you know, infections and so forth in that town downwind from the chemical plant.
You know, there's no money in cure. There's only
I
money
know
in
that.
treatment.
Well, that's right. That's right. That's why it doesn't get done. That's right. Because it works. Just think how amazing it would be if we could get 5% of the FDA budget to work on natural cures. But that's never going to happen.
We have to use our budget to do it.
Yeah. 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 We don't have enough money to do it. Right.
You can't sell free electricity and you can't sell free healthcare, man.
That's right.
Right.
That's exactly right. So,
Yeah.
you know, we have that issue continuously. And, you know, you think about brainwashing, so-called alternative medicine has been around for 15,000 years, and we call it alternative. And Western allopathic medicine has been around for maybe 125 years, and we call it traditional. So
Yeah, it don't make sense.
we've been brainwashed.
Don't make
Yeah.
sense.
So anyway, are there any other questions for you guys? Or from you
About does it
guys?
for me. I appreciate you taking your time to speak with us. This was
That's
very,
fine.
very enlightening. Very enlightening. I tried to come into it with as open a mind as possible, and you've kind of set my mind at ease with a lot of things. So I appreciate that.
Well, you know, a lot of this is just it's been peeling the onion back for me too. I mean, I started, you know, finding this information years ago, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger. And I finally said, I can't be doing justice to all the information I have by doing, you know, I mean, this kind of a medium is very important, but people really want to get the guts. They're going to have to get the book and read it and see all of this stuff for themselves.
That's why we started doing we talked for, you know, a couple of months about doing these meetings and posting them, because there are more people out there like us that have questions.
That's right.
And they're really confused, and more people that know, the better we're going to be.
Well, that's right. That's right. And that's what this is all about. And, you know, we're on historically, I've been on the foundation's YouTube page is where most of these videos, we've got over 200 videos, you know, doing various documentaries and interviews and things like that on this. But we're expanding to Rumble and BitChute as well, because, you know, one of you asked the question earlier, you know, I don't know how much longer, you know, they'll keep me on YouTube if I, you know, they may not like me for much longer. So I don't know.
YouTube's overrated anyways.
That's right. That's right. So anyway, you know, Tony, if you'll tell me, I'm happy to put up a discount code for your audience if they're interested. You know, I'll give them 10% off. If you'll just tell me what would be a good, you know, name for it, I'll write up a. How about would it be Maori 10%? Would that work?
Let's use ropes and wings 10%. That'd be good. Did you get that?
Eric,
Okay.
He's always got to plug his farm. He's got to plug his farm.
Well, whatever. You give it to me. Tell it to the audience, and I'll write it down, and we'll make that it.
It'd be ropes and wings 10.
Roasted wings 10. Let's make it 10%.
Ropes.
Okay.
Ropes.
It's ropes.
I'm sorry.
Ropes and wings. Like
rope and wings. Okay.
Ropes.
ROPE
Yes.
AND wings. Okay, 10%. Okay, I'll set up that coupon code right after we finish here, and then all your subscribers can get 10% off of their products.
Hey,
Okay.
Charlie,
Charles, man, it was really great.
Charlie, I really apologize for my internet because I live in the outback and I'm working on satellite, so it drags a bit. But
Oh, well, don't worry about it.
the discount code would be ropes and wings 10. ROPESANDWINGS 10.
Okay. ROPESANDWINGS 10.
Correct.
Okay, we'll leave off the percent sign. That's fine. Yeah. Okay, ropes and wings 10.
Yep.
Got it.
That'll work.
Perfect.
I
right.
I really appreciate you meeting with us, Charlie, and this has been awesome. And we need to get together.
Oh, my pleasure.
Because I know for one, I would
Okay.
like to build a pyramid here on our farm, see what we can do with it, and see if we can get free energy and
Yeah.
use it for healing, and it'd be great. So,
Yeah,
make
I agree.
make
I
sure-
totally agree.
make sure you plug yourself where I need to get the information in the description, but plug yourself where people can find you and contribute. And
The a couple of locations. First of all, I'm doing this not to make money, folks, but the foundation can always use contributions. That's the source of our funding. So if you go to pyramidsciencefoundation.org, it's really just a placeholder at this point, but there's a donate button there that you can make contributions if you got value from the information I gave you today. Consider making a contribution to the foundation to help with that. A portion of the proceeds of the book I'm writing are going to go as well to fund foundation research going forward. If you're interested in buying pyramids, go to stargatepyramids.com. And that's where, when you shop and exit, just use that coupon code ropes and wings 10, and you'll get 10% off. I guess that's it. That should do it. So I really do appreciate the chance to be with you guys today. It's been fun, and really, you guys had some great questions, and so that shows that you came prepared, and I appreciate it, because having good questions makes me look a little bit smarter too.
and when you see
The definition of an expert is somebody who's 5 minutes ahead of their audience, if you know what I mean.
Right.
when you see a bunch of hillbillies like us asking those questions, it makes it even more. It makes it better.
Well, what's funny is everybody has good questions.
Yeah.
If they just allow themselves to ask what they think are stupid questions, they're really the most profound ones. That's, everything I figured out is asking dumb questions, but they turn out not to be so stupid after all, so who knows?
Sure.
All right, guys.
Absolutely
All right.
awesome.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you very much.
All right. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.